Hopefully you do know me, because if you don't, then I'm not doing my job. So just a quick just order of events for today. So we're going to be doing a session on macroeconomics. That's going to be held by Aroni. Aroni is the chief economist overlooking the African continent from COFAS Group. He is based in Paris at the economics department. So really warm welcome to Aroni. Thank you for joining us all the way in sunny, well, not so sunny, but warm Johannesburg. And then we're going to be followed by session 2, which is going to be done by Eric. He's at Worksman's Attorneys. He's the head of insolvency and business restructuring. What we'll be doing then is entering into a bit of a panel discussion, so encouraging everybody to, ask questions, raise your hand if there's anything you want to discuss. So really exciting session for today, and I'm really glad that you can have you all here today. So just a quick overview of COFAS. We've obviously been through quite a lot of changes over the last 18 months, and I think the one constant that we've seen is the commitment from a group and a regional perspective in terms of supporting South Africa, supporting the growth that we see in the South African market. What we see is a lot of opportunity to continue growing, to continue embedding the product offering that we've got into the local market. And together with you as our partners, we believe that that is the right strategy to go to market. Now, there's a lot of obviously other areas of the Power the Core plan. So I know we've kind of touched on it briefly. COFAS last year launched the Power the Core plan, which is the plan that's going to take us to 2027. And it's built on some key foundations. So just to quickly touch on it, data is becoming more and more important. The access to data, the quality of data, the ability to make quick decisions, accurate decisions. We don't want to make decisions and then change them. I think it's becoming more important. The access to APIs, the access to AI is becoming more and more prevalent in this day and age. So that's a big focus for what we're doing at COFAS, to make sure that we're growing the market and doing it in line with what we see the market evolving to. Trade credit insurance 10 years ago was very different to what it is now. We understand that, and we know we need to adapt to the local market in order to make sure that we can meet our clients' needs and demands. Business information is a key part of the strategy, so trying to grow business information. We believe the access to data that we have through trade credit allows us to be very competitive when it comes to business information, whether it's business reports, whether it's opinions, whether it's analysis, DRA trends, etc., etc. So a lot happening on that front. And at the end of the day, and the key part of the strategy is to continue to be a TCI leader in the market. So focusing on our strengths, focusing on what we do well, making sure that we can service our clients, making sure that what we commit to as an insurer is ultimately what we deliver. So it's really nice that we've got obviously Aronian doing this session, because I think it links quite well in terms of what we're seeing on the day-to-day side in South Africa, in Africa, in the world, because we're going to touch on quite a lot of not just what's happening currently locally in South Africa, but currently what's happening around the world, which is of just as much importance. So yeah, I encourage everybody to participate, ask questions, and I'm going to hand over to Aroni.
Is this working? Oh, fantastic. And actually, I saw that there was a dot. There was a dot. I didn't know this dot was here in the morning, so I'm going to use it more in the afternoon. Hi, everyone. So I'm Aroni. I'm the economist for Africa, one of the economists for Africa in COFAS. And first of all, I'm very happy to be in South Africa. So I said this little story in the morning as well, that I actually have a history with this country. I came here 10 years ago. When I was doing my final essay for my master's degree, and I worked on South Africa. I worked on the management of water resources. So I'm sure here in Johannesburg it rings a bell as well. It's still very much of a contemporary problem, but it was already the case in 2015. Since I have a bit of time, I also want to speak of economic research a bit, because obviously I'm doing the presentation here, but and especially for all our partners, it's also for you to understand that economic research at COFAS is at the service of its partners, of its clients, so that you know that there is a team of dedicated economists that can brief you on the outlook of most parts of the world. There are 23 of us currently, so we have grown. We're a quite big team. And so part of the work here that I'm going to present is the work of the entire team of my colleagues, and part of it is also my work. And just to know that, you can always solicit us if you have any interrogations on what's happening in the global economy. As you know, everything is shifting very fast. For us, it's also an exercise to be updated as quickly and as precisely as possible. So I hope that you enjoy the presentation. So I'm going to adopt a top-down approach. I'll go through the main trends of the global economy, which will make you understand a bit what our core scenario is, how we think things are going to shape up, and then trickle down to some regional markets around the world, on the African continent, and obviously we'll finish with South Africa, on which I have a lot of things to say. Good things, mostly, but also some risks. Is this working? Not working? Ah, great. Okay, so the first thing in the top-down approach is to look at commodity prices, because in the recent years they have really shaped some of the global macroeconomic trends. And so, first of all, the good news is that they have come down from the peaks that they had reached after the onset of the war in Ukraine. But if you look at these different graphs, you can see that the price levels are still considerably higher than the pre-pandemic averages. And despite the fact that they have decreased and that there is some relative stability right now, there is still a lot of volatility on the different commodities markets and very differentiated trends. So let's start with energy, for energy prices. So fuel, obviously extremely important for the South African economy, fuel prices in general. So we think that overall oil prices will be lower this year than they were last year. Last year they were at around $80 per barrel. This year we think there's going to be around 75. And the reason behind it is that basically the oil market, the global oil market, is currently in a situation of oversupply. So demand is kind of stable, and there is a lot of excess supply on the market, especially in the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and obviously there are still some production quotas of the OPEC that they will scale down at some point. But on the other hand, we also have additional supply coming in from new producers. So for instance, we have Senegal on the African continent who recently started to produce, Guyana in Latin America. We have good production figures in Brazil, and obviously in the US, production was already increasing, but with the new Trump policies and the deregulation of the energy sector, US production is also going to increase. So that means that overall, there will be more than enough supply to meet demand, and that's why we don't expect oil prices to increase dramatically. For oil prices, obviously, the situation in the Middle East has evolved. I would say that in terms of tensions, the peak has been passed for this episode. There might be more. But even at the peak of the crisis after the October 7 attacks in Israel, oil prices did not explode, and the reason was that the main production sector were not affected. The conflicts were regionalized. And despite some of the geopolitical tensions, the production levels were still in a state where there was more than enough supply relative to demand. So it is a factor of uncertainty. Geopolitics is a factor of uncertainty. But on the oil market, we don't think it's going to influence it so that prices are higher next year. For other categories of commodities, so for instance for agro-commodities, very differentiated trends. So for instance, the price for cereals, wheat, are trending downwards, and that's because you had good harvests, good seasonal harvest last year. Whereas you have prices of some commodities like cocoa that are reaching highs, but because of production constraints in the main producers, for cocoa it's Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, and demand for chocolate for cocoa is ever increasing, so that is like kind of a long-term problem. We jokingly say that soon, Christmas chocolate is going to be a luxury gift if the market stays in this way. But you also have commodities such as rice and palm oil, for which the prices are still quite high, also because some of the main producers and consumers, like India for rice, have lifted some of the export restrictions, but still remain very committed to protect their domestic demand before concentrating on their exports. For agro-commodities, one of the main factors of volatility is obviously the weather. So no matter what Donald Trump says, climate change is not fake. We can see it every day, more so in the African continent. Extreme weather events are more frequent, more intense. We have weather events that did not exist before in some parts of the continent that are actually materializing, like regular flooding in West Africa, cyclones reaching the tip of Tanzania, which was not the case before. It was before they reached rather Mozambique. So this is obviously, due to the importance of agriculture on the African continent, a factor of risk. And it is also a factor of risk for other producing zones. So in 2023 and 4, we were in a phenomenon called El Nino, which generally, without going into the details, will exacerbate the effects of climate change, warmer weather, more droughts. And we saw that happen in Southern Africa, but also in Latin America. And so now, at the end of last year, we have transitioned into the opposite phenomena, which is La Nina, and which is generally cooler temperatures, wetter weather, which normally is positive for agricultural production, which means that it should, at least in some zones, lead to better production figures and so downward pressure on prices. But even La Nina has its extreme weather events through flooding, which can happen in Southern Africa, which can happen in Latin America, or in Australia, or in the US. So this is definitely a factor to monitor, and it is a high factor of volatility. For industrial metals, I would say that there are two very distinct trends. The first one is on the steel market, and I'll touch on that later because South Africa has obviously experienced issues on its steel market. But steel prices obviously trend downwards for two main factors: is that the big client sectors, construction, automotive, in the main economic zones are still in quite a weak state. Second reason is China, obviously, main consumer, main producer of steel, which has still problems with its real estate sector. So not only is steel demand for the mineral it being decreasing from China, the Chinese steel production also has to be exported because there is not enough demand on the Chinese market, which causes imported Chinese steel prices in other countries to come and destabilize some of the local industries. One of the reasons of the ArcelorMittal announcement of closure in South Africa. On the other hand, the other category of metals, the ones we'll call strategic metals, or the ones that are really useful for the energy transition, copper, aluminium, there the prices are trending rather upwards. Everyone expects there to be stable demand or increasing demand in the future due to the energy transition. And also you have the industrial policy in the US that is likely to focus on the sector. So commodity traders do expect US demand to be quite buoyant in the coming years. And that is why prices for those metals are going to remain quite comfortable. And so for producers of these metals, copper producers, the outlook should be pretty good in terms of exports. So generally speaking, the United States would be a region, economic zone, main economic zone I focus on afterwards. But right now, because of the shift that has happened through the re-election of Donald Trump, it is also a core assumption in our scenario. A core assumption not only because of what's going to happen in the US, but what the effect of what is going to happen in the US on the world is going to produce in the short to medium term. So just to understand very quickly what, in essence, Trump's policies are, they are aimed at stimulating the US economy, at creating strategic industries that can compete, especially with China, and it is to make the US economy less reliant on the rest of the world through protectionism. So how does it do that? To stimulate the economy, tax cuts through running larger fiscal deficits. So you're using the budgets to finance tax cuts, and at this point, we think that fiscal deficits in the US will be around 8 to 10% of GDP in the medium term. Debt will also increase quite substantially. You have, obviously, protectionist policies. So here, no one actually knows what the full-fledged policy is going to look like. There are going to be tariffs on most products, probably, on products coming from China, on categories of products. But we don't know yet when and how it is going to be implemented. So we saw that for the first tariffs, the 25% that were announced for Canada and Mexico were bargaining chips to bring them to the negotiation table. You know, we want less immigration, we want more control on the flows of drugs, of opioids into the US, and that kind of worked. So now it has been pushed back by 1 month. Tariffs have been implemented on China, but not yet extremely important. They are likely to increase, but once again, due to the fact that the US and Chinese economies are really interconnected, it means that they will be in a step-by-step measure. and they're unlikely to be very brutal. And also, tariffs on the rest of the world are more likely to come 10 to 20%. This we don't know yet. But we know that there are going to be tariffs, and so that, in essence, is something that will shape the trade relationships in the world, and it will create more trade fragmentation, we think. And obviously a much tougher immigration policy, because that is one of his leitmotifs. Deregulation of the energy sector, but also of the finance sector in order to increase liquidity and the capacity of the US economy to borrow and to finance itself. So this will, I mean, this is supposed to and this should stimulate the US economy in the short term. However, in the medium to long term, all of these policies are inflationary in nature, because obviously protectionism is inflationary as long as you don't have an industry that is capable to respond to the needs of the domestic economy. So it's going to be gradual, obviously. Tougher immigration policy is less migrant workers on a job market that is already extremely tight. So that means pressure on wages. That is inflationary in the medium term. Same thing for cheap financing and the deregulation of finance, and obviously, creating deficits, using deficits to create growth. It has been proved that it is quite inflationary in nature. So that means that once the initial impulse of this policy in terms of growth in the US has kind of flattened out, you move into a stagflationary risk world where you have slower growth and a high inflation level, which also means higher interest rates of the Fed, and I'll talk about that just afterwards. What this means is that since, due to the importance of the US in the global economy, as well as the importance of the dollar as a reserve currency for most of the world, this has an impact on the rest of the world. So we don't think that it's going to have an impact immediately, but in the medium term, we think that the balance is negative for the rest of the world and for the global economy if this is, if depending on the US policy and the responses. Because China will have to readapt its growth model because of the tariffs it will be facing, not only in terms of trade competition with the US, but also the tariffs that are in the EU and other countries that are likely to adopt them, because protectionism is kind of contagious in nature. Very big risk for the EU and for the countries that run large trade surpluses with the US, France, Germany, Italy, because this is obviously a risk to their exports. In a world where their domestic demand is low, in a world where EU growth is already low, so this creates additional risks. Also, when the US is saying that it will run the large deficit, it means that US bond yields will increase, and US bond yields increasing at some point means that EU bond yields also increase, which means that financing becomes more and more complicated, and the EU financial market is already very fragmented, and you have countries that are already in a situation where their debt levels are far beyond what they should be, France, Italy. So that also can bring an additional set of problems, and we know what the state of the EU sovereign debt had been, when the crisis occurred. Obviously now there are fail-safes, there are mechanisms to protect, but they're vulnerable to a rise in US yields. And for emerging markets as a whole, South Africa included, stronger dollars means currencies that are depreciating. It means capital outflows from emerging markets towards US markets, exactly what we saw in 2023 when 2022 and 2023 when the monetary tightening began. A lot of capital outflows because obviously you're bringing back assets into safer markets, which also have higher return due to higher interest rates. Obviously, for countries that have debt in dollars and that are just heavily indebted, this means financing becomes more difficult, more debt sustainability issues. And also, if China faces strong tariffs in some of its main trading partners, the US, the EU, it means that they will have to find new markets to export their products. And so that means that some local industries in emerging markets might be at risk of increased competition from cheap Chinese products, and that can result into issues for companies operating in this country and in these businesses. So this is, now I've given you the general scenario, the core scenario of what we think the US, particularly, and the US policy will do on the rest of the world. So in terms of inflation and monetary policy, So now there's going to be a divergence between what happens in the United States and the Eurozone, the two main big monetary zones that we look at for like global monetary policy trends. There was already a divergence between the EU and the US in inflation. You can't see it here because you don't have the drivers or the reasons behind it. But you see the disinflation, it was in 2023 and 4. This was mainly due to the fall in commodity prices of energy and food. And then it was gradually slower because the main driver of inflation was services, and services inflation was high because wages were high. The cost of this disinflation, especially in this part, in the EU was borne by the private sector. Because you had high wage growth and at the same time low demand, it means that corporate profit margins were being eroded. And that was the case in most large EU economies. In the US, it was slightly different because, first of all, you also at some point had a slowdown in wage growth, which is not the case anymore, because you had migrant workers, 3 million workers coming in the US market. And also you had productivity gains, stronger demand. So I would say the cost of this inflation was distributed a bit more evenly among the different economic agents. So the divergence is that you can see here that inflation is now hovering on near the target of the central bank, which is 2%. And in the US it is picking up again, and it will pick up more considering the fact that they will remain committed to these policies in all likelihood. So this means that we expected at the, let's say, third quarter of last year that the interest rate levels would come down to the neutral level, which is, let's say, 2 to 2.5%, 2%. And it's going to be the case in the EU because inflation is close to target and demand is relatively low, and so there's a need to stimulate the European economies. So we do expect 3 to 4 rate cuts this year for the ECB, bringing back the deposit rate at around 2%. But for the Fed, that's not at all going to be the case. Maybe at maximum now, the market expects 1 rate cut. There could also be a pause, there could also be a hike. All of this is possible, which means that the Fed's fund rate will remain at around 4%. And this, in essence, means that, once again, you have on emerging market currencies depreciation pressures. You have central banks of emerging economy, and this is true of South Africa, who will have to, as well, kind of pause their monetary policy, whereas perhaps their inflation readings did not go in that way, because they need to keep a differential that would protect their currencies to some extent against too strong of a depreciation. This means that financing costs remain high for countries around the world. This means basically that what we called the financing or the funding squeeze, depending if you're on country or a company level, will actually be prolonged. We expected it to ease this year, it won't ease. Mainly because the Fed, the interest rate of the Federal Reserve is so determining in many aspects for the global economy. So all in all, in terms of GDP growth, we are in stability, but we are stability below potential, which is around 3% for the global economy. The drivers of growth are going to remain the same, in the sense that it's going to be the US on the one hand, and I explained the reasons why the US economy will remain very resilient, and the emerging markets on the other hand. I'll go more into detail into China afterwards, but you have large emerging economies that, like India, that continue to perform well, thanks mainly, in the case of India, to its very strong domestic demand and also lots of infrastructure in construction and digitalization. Brazil is also, in Latin America, expected to continue to perform at a slightly lower level, but also quite well. The big loser, quote unquote, or the economic zone where growth is going to be the lowest is obviously the Eurozone. The reason is that, first of all, the manufacturing industries in the Eurozone are facing low demand. European consumers are not at all confident in the economy. So for instance, for France and Germany, this is also linked to the political scene, which is becoming increasingly fragmented, increasingly tense. There are questions around the budgets. And so, for instance, when as a French consumer, I'm talking in experience, you don't have a budget that is voted in time, you don't know what your taxation is going to be next year, you're generally going to save instead of consuming. And so that is what is also creating this lack of demand in the Eurozone, among others. One outlier is You have a growth rate that's 3 times the one of the other large European economies. The reason is that consumption is more solid. Their tourism industry is a big driver, and also Spanish energy, because one of the main issues, for instance, of Germany is the cost of energy to its industries, which is not at all competitive once the flow of Russian gas was interrupted. So for Spain, who have access to cheaper energy, their industries are just more cost competitive than the other one in the Eurozone. So overall stability, the main risks, there is obviously the risk of fiscal slippage in the Eurozone because we have some very indebted countries. We also have overall, and this is important, and we'll talk about it afterwards, insolvency levels are increasing or normalizing, but they're increasing, for instance, in the Eurozone in most countries. And so that not only creates like a destruction of demand, but also increases political and social risks. So that is also to take into account climate risk, political risk, and obviously the general effects of a more fragmented world, both commercially and politically. So just a small focus on China, because I think we need to talk about China before we go into the African continent because of the importance of China in trade links and financing links. So for the Chinese economy, it is growing under its potential. Although every year, I mean this year, they reached the growth target. These are figures that often are said to be a bit unreliable. Some economists go as far to say that it's actually half the growth rate that's been put forward. All in all, one has to understand that the will that the Chinese authorities had for the Chinese economy moving forward was that it would be both based on production, investment, and exports, and also, and increasingly so, on the Chinese consumer, on domestic demand. The part on domestic demand is not functioning. First of all, because of the property crisis, so a lot of Chinese people who had bought homes and indebted themselves saw the value of their assets diminish. So that was one large part why consumers are not confident. Unemployment rates are pretty high, especially among the young. And so all in all, this lackluster performance, domestic performance, means that Chinese consumers are much more likely to save than to consume or to invest. So that is the limiting factor of domestic demand. On the other hand, you do still have good momentum in investment and in exports, and this is mainly led by the strategic industries that China has identified. So for them, it's electric vehicles, solar panels, and lithium-ion batteries, whereas before it used to be the big infrastructure, the big heavy industry, steel, etc. So that has shifted. But why I was saying that China will also need to rethink how it approaches this model is that obviously right now, since their domestic demand is low, they are focusing on their export size to meet their growth targets. The issue is that when you have increasing tariffs both in the US and in the EU, and that you don't have, you have less access to export markets for your products, then how do you do to reach your growth target? Because that is going to become a limiting factor. The answer is that the Chinese authorities will probably implement some kind of larger stimulus into the economy to stimulate the real estate sector, the Chinese consumer, some of the banks, deleveraging the local governments who were very indebted. And it is likely to come perhaps in the coming months. There were already some measures that were implemented, but which were of relatively small scale. But we also think that perhaps the Chinese authorities are also waiting a bit to see what exactly the US's stance is going to be, how strong are the tariffs going to be before themselves implementing the stimulus. But we have the intuition that there has to be, in order for China to achieve its target, there has to be a stronger stimulus of their domestic economy. But all of this also means that for China's trading partners, with China underperforming, that means that probably in terms of trade demand from China, on some commodities it's going to be much lower than before. So for instance, on steel, it is going to be lower than before because that is not their strategic industry anymore. On the other hand, for copper, for aluminium, for other types of rare earths, maybe Chinese demand actually increases because that is the strategic sector. So depending on your specializations and your trade links with China, this means that you kind of have to rethink your trade relationships as well. In terms of financing, same thing. We have seen that because China has financed historically many African countries, but even in that aspect, we're starting to see that the Chinese loans are now targeted towards countries that they deem more stable, and just because they have their own economic issues, they have their own debt problems, and so they're also more cautious in their approach into lending into poorer countries. But it's still very important. I mean, Chinese financing and investment is still very important on the African continent. So now we're on the African continent. We'll soon be into South Africa, but I think it's important to talk about the overall outlook. Just in terms of aggregated growth rate, which actually don't mean much for the African continent because of the diversity and the sheer number of countries involved. But this is just to show you that first of all, that the past years have been quite difficult for the African continent because, yes, you have growth rates above 3% that can be considered as quite high relative to other regions, but with a continent such as Africa and the demographic trends, 3.2% growth rate or 3.4% growth rates mean that GDP per capita is like barely increasing and obviously very unevenly. So this is just to show the aggregated growth rate that we're going to go back to a growth rate which is closer to the potential and which is likely to continue in the years going forward as well. That's also the aggregated part. Now, in terms of the groups of countries, generally we do think that diversified economies, which have different types of growth drivers, are going to have stronger and more stable growth than countries that are overly intensive in resources, commodity exporters. Commodity exporters will grow as well, but at a slower pace and with more volatility because their economies are more exposed to external shocks. So that is in the group of countries. Now, if we take some of the economies, and since I have a bit of time, I want to talk about some of them. So for instance, if you take the larger economies, so I'll talk about South Africa extensively, but take Nigeria and Egypt, the largest economies are currently in a phase of structural correction through economic reforms of different natures. For South Africa, it is based on the systemic industries. In Nigeria and Egypt, is fiscal and monetary policies. But they're in a phase where they're correcting some of the very long-standing imbalances of their economies, which also means that in terms of growth, they're probably not growing at their potential, they're below their potential. But these policies are also aimed at re-increasing the capital attractiveness, enable this country to finance their growth in the medium to long term. And that is why the larger economies are underperforming a bit, but for reasons that are known, at least partly. You have, on the other hand, frontier markets, so medium-sized economies. When we say frontier means it's between developing and emerging. It's at that level. That are doing very well across the continent. The two most dynamic regions, so if we divide the African continent into northwest, central, east, southern, the most dynamic in terms of growth is Eastern and Western Africa. So in Western Africa, you have countries like Côte d'Ivoire, like Ghana, like Senegal, that have diversified growth drivers, that have generally good. They have a decent business environment relative to some of their peers. They have relative institutional stability. They have access to commodities. Some are very highly demanded. So for Ghana, gold and cocoa are very demanded, very high prices. So as I was saying, like they have the diversity of having both exports and domestic drivers. Kenya, Tanzania also have their tourism industries that are very, very in demand, especially from Asia. They're also they're developing their transport, airport, port activity, becoming kind of this. My intuition is that they'll become these new hubs into the African continent from the Indian Ocean, and we're seeing a lot of investments from Asia and the Gulf country into these economies. And these are markets, I think, to look at. Obviously, they're not extremely mature yet, but they have very strong momentum, and also they have a good amount of support, both in terms of loans and in terms of project financing. So the international community also views these markets as promising. In Southern Africa, you also have different outlooks, I would say. For instance, for Botswana, obviously due to what's happening on the diamond market, competition from lab-grown diamonds, we're in a state where the economy has contracted, will contract last year because we don't have the final figures. And then perhaps of a recovery, which also showcases a big vulnerability of a non-diversified economy. If the diamond market is in a slump, Botswana goes into a slump. Although the country has other qualities, it has a sovereign fund, it has got relative political stability, it still suffers just from the fact that there is these commodity markets that are not in the right direction. On the other hand, Zambia, we expect a recovery simply because last year the drought really affected the economy, not only through the effects on agriculture, but also because a lot of Zambia's electricity is hydro-powered, and so obviously drought means less power, so power issues for the very important copper production sites, but that also has started to increase in recent months, so we expect some amount of recovery. Namibia, for instance, which still has a very strong mining industry, but has also new industries emerging, green hydrogen being the big one, a lot of projects there, and also have, these countries also have started to implement policies that look to enhance slowly the drivers of domestic demand, of consumption, making them more than just economies that are based on mining. And that's also an important part, the political will to understand that mining resources are very important for the country, but that there's a need to diversify to make growth more stable. And so I think that Zambia, for instance, identified that when the current president was elected. So I won't go over all of them, but as you can see, the message is that there is growth. There is growth in African countries. And also, perhaps in the longer term, is that this growth means that at some point there is going to be an increase in regional integration. Trade flows between African countries up until now are still quite lackluster compared to what they trade with the rest of the world. But eventually they're going to trade with each other when the markets become more mature, when there is a stronger need also for processed and even raw materials. So that is something to keep in mind more in the medium to long-term perspective. So now for South Africa. I have a lot to say. So first of all, yes, the end of last year was a bit disappointing in terms of growth performance. My forecast for this year is 0.7, so it's going to be below 1. The reason was mainly the big contraction in the agricultural sector because of the midsummer drought and the effects on crop yields. But on the bright side, I would say that some of the positive signals that we had seen at the end of last year are still valid, and that is, I think, the key point. First of all, obviously, there's the government of national unity that is holding, that is now showing that it is showing it's committed to push through a reform agenda that is aimed, once again, at correcting these structural issues on unemployment, on the systemic industries, on the transport, energy, utilities networks. And once again, one should not have too high of expectations immediately. These are policies that take time to materialize, and time to materialize especially in data. So they also one has to keep in mind that these results will probably come in 2 to 3 years. Already if they start to materialize correctly in 2 to 3 years, that would be a good thing. Obviously, load shedding, has practically disappeared. I would have said completely if there was not these 2 days recently. But still, it's much better in terms of energy supply. And so the effect of this better energy supply, the effects of the easing of the logistical bottlenecks is that supply conditions, production conditions have improved. But the manufacturing industries are still stagnating because demand is still low. So the real positive driver, I think, of South African growth in the next quarters is going to be consumption. So the fact that consumption is still posting positive figures, mainly directed to services, and that's why you can see that the main driver here has been services. This consumption is, for now, and should remain, and should also be a point of focus to become one of the primary drivers of a more stable growth. Simply because the external environment is not going to get easier. And in terms of demand, you have to the fact that you can't control external demand, kind of. So you have to, if you want to boost demand for your industries, you have to invest more perhaps in your domestic demand. So maybe that needs to be the focus going forward for the South African economy, to be more concentrated on correcting these structural issues and making sure that there is enough focus that is put on stimulating domestic demand. Investment would also be a driver, but perhaps a bit less than what was anticipated, simply because the monetary policy is going to become restrictive. And so I'll go on inflation later, but one of the reasons we also have stronger consumption is that we have lower inflation, simply put, so more income. Very quickly on the activity indicators, you can see here that these are very volatile curves. And so this is what the South African economy is lacking currently, is a bit more stability in the manufacturing industries and in the industrial world in general, because it's still subject to volatile demand, to trade disruptions, for instance, with Mozambique after the post-election violence, the issues on the transport networks, and so on. And this is why the PMI has been contracting for 3 consecutive months. However, when you look at the survey, generally speaking, despite these quite weak figures in the past 3 months, generally the survey says that the businesses are quite optimistic in balance for the next 6 to 12 months. So they think that things are going to improve, and when I talk to people here, the general feel I have in a couple of days that yes, the fact that these reforms are being implemented and there's some amount of commitment, maybe there's the feeling that things will get better, and it's really important to have that feeling because confidence is a big driver of decisions, both in terms of consumption and investment. And so you can see here in the activity indicator that indeed, manufacturing and mining are still in contraction due to weak demand. There's also logistical constraint. On the other hand, retail sales are the positive factor, and this is linked to the fact that consumption is quite, I won't say it's strong, but it's in positive territory, which is already very good. So in terms of inflation, this was a good surprise, a pleasant surprise that this inflation process, it was slow at the beginning, but then it accelerated quite fast, quite strongly in the second half of 2024. And so now we have a headline inflation rate which is at 3%. It will remain under the target for 2025 as a whole. It will also remain below 4% probably for the first half of the year, and then it's likely to increase a bit more simply because you will have an adjustment of electricity prices, and also there is the effect of the rand, and I'll go through that later, which can influence inflation. So in terms of monetary policy, so this is where I was saying that some emerging economies will depend on the Fed's monetary policies because the South African Reserve Bank is in that case. Normally, if you look at the trajectory of inflation and at the forecasts for inflation in the next 6 to 12 months, this should leave more space for the Reserve Bank to cut rates. But they're probably not going to do so because they want to keep this interest rate differential with the Federal Reserve so that the rand does not lose too much in value. Since the rand is a determinant of inflation, they cannot actually cut rates too far. So in their last press release, they suggested that there might be one more rate cut, but that probably the rates would remain well above 7% at the policy level. So which means that the interest rate level is going to be stable, but it's still going to be quite high. There is not much more room for maneuver at this stage because of what's happening in the US. But that's also, as I said, that's also the fact that the South African economy has a completely flexible exchange rate. Let's market forces determine the flows of capital. And so because of the role of the dollar, inherently you're exposed to US monetary policy. So overall, that means that the inflation level should be low enough that it would continue to somewhat stimulate consumption, but that there is not much room for interest rates to, at least at the policy rate level, to go down much further, which is exactly what I said for the US, because once again, they're aligned. So for the rand, So basically, I was saying this morning, and it's a currency that's very, very representative of an open emerging economy, completely flexible exchange rate. But as you can see, the trend of the rand, so if you look at the curve, like the trend here is like the trend of the current account. So it's linked to the external balances, so the flow of currency moving in and out of the country. But since it is completely flexible, it's also speculative, which means that there's a lot of volatility. And that is also subject in this part, in some of these parts, to investor confidence in the economy, capital flows. So basically, on the external part, the trade surplus actually is surprised quite a bit this year. But generally, the current account deficit is going to widen, simply because since we do expect that we have domestic demand that will increase, that generally means imports increase, where the commodity price basket for South Africa's exports will remain stable at best, probably. And that means that the trade surpluses will shrink a bit, and then the other drivers, like for instance here, like this is a repatriation of profits mainly on the primary income deficit, that will continue to pressure the current account. So the current account deficit will remain, which means that, I mean, the rand is unlikely to go up significantly at all, or to go up at all. Within that, there is the volatility factors, and the volatility factors are, for instance, when the GNU was elected, there was a spur in investor confidence, so the rand regained some value. When Donald Trump was elected, the dollar gained strength, so capital outflows happened, so then it lost some value. When Donald Trump says that, about the land expropriation bill, and that he will stop aid to South Africa, which is just perhaps an announcement, or that will generally create some volatility. Maybe not much, but that will create some volatility. All of this to say that yes, there is some amount of volatility that will continue to happen because we're in a volatile world. But at the same time, it can be in one way or the other. So yes, maybe the external environment and whatever is said on X by the American president can influence the rand a bit, but it's also means that if there are signals that the South African economy is doing well, that the GNU is committed to its reforms, that we see some growth, some spring in growth, that you also have a renewal of investor confidence, and that kind of compensates perhaps from the other tensions. And that's just the nature of a speculative currency. So the assumption is that it will remain low, like it will remain perhaps in the 19 to 20 to a dollar range. The Reserve Bank made some models which showed that if there was a 10% blanket increase in tariffs in the US and its repercussions, that it could, based on that factors, that the rand could drop to 21 or below, and which would mean that at that point inflation goes back above 5% under unchanged conditions. So there are risks, but all in all, the main message is that it will remain weak. It's unlikely to gain much strength, and the amount it loses will depend on what happens both domestically and externally. In terms of the fiscal outlook for South Africa, I'd say that the outlook has not deteriorated. It's not too bad. So basically, the deficit, I mean, it was quite strong in 23 and 24, 5% of GDP. It's expected to shrink a bit, but not by a large margin, 4.7, 4.3 in the next years. The issue is that in terms of revenue, the authorities have not shown that they wanted to increase taxes, and perhaps it's just because they can't. Perhaps the taxation levels are already too high, and also would constrain growth and the ability to generate more revenue through economic growth. So the revenues will perhaps increase a bit through a bit stronger growth rate next year, if it's above 1%. And at the same time, the revenues from trade are unlikely to increase very substantially. But at the same time, on the expenditure side, I mean, it is true that even before the JNU, there was more commitment to fiscal prudence. There was, the fact that the state wage bill would be managed a bit better, and also the fact that generally spending would be more limited. That has been committed to. So that is what is kind of bringing back the deficit by a notch. And that is likely to continue. The thing is that unless you are generating substantial amount of growth you're not generating much revenue, and which is why you can't really correct the deficit in the medium term to below 4%. Now, this does not mean that there cannot be a change, in the sense that for the South African government, if in some of the steps of these reforms, and one of the important parts is the privatization, partly or entirely, that we'll know, of some of the SOEs that manage these big utilities, would also mean that at some point their weight on the government's expenses would diminish, and then perhaps more spending can be targeted towards more productive parts of the economy. Because once again, the fact is not that you have 4% deficit, that's not unmanageable, it's the fact that the resources are not being used properly. If the resources are used properly to generate growth, then there is much more reason to have deficits. So this all means that in terms of debt levels, they're probably going to be closer to 80% of GDP. However, and it's important to note that although, yes, I mean, South Africa doesn't have an investment grade rating in terms of sovereign bonds, it's a country that's very unlikely to default because of the structure of its debt, which is mostly local domestic debt denominated in rand, which makes it quite protected to external shocks. And it is possible that thanks to that bit of leeway and the fact that the financing costs for South Africa have decreased, especially since 2024, that there might be a bit more external financing, which would give a bit of leeway to find extra cash to finance some infrastructure investments or whatever the government is focused on. So it's going to remain a situation where the public accounts are strained and the fiscal space is strained, but with slight improvements. And once again, it's the fact that you see a bit of improvement every year. That's what signals to the markets and to the economy and to the people that you're going in the right direction. It's not just brutally going from 4% to 0%. That's not going to happen for an economy like South Africa. So I think that that's something to look out for. At the sector level, so this is our sector risk assessment. So as you can see, for South Africa, I mean, we only have two sectors that are at medium risk, which are ICT and pharmaceuticals. All of the others are at high risk or above, and which is, I think, relevant considering the past few years in South Africa and just the state of the economy. But this also means that perhaps there is room for improvement. I won't say in the near future, because once again, I think it's going to take a bit of time. But at least in the foreseeable future, hopefully, some of these industries do gain some momentum. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but some sectors to watch. Agri-food. So as I said, like with La Nina being a phenomena where there's more rainfall, especially in Southern Africa, that could be positive for South African agriculture. But once again, I mean, the sector has been underperforming for the past 18 months, so let's see if it recovers correctly. Automotive, which had held quite well in 2023, thanks to exports, where we have a kind of a reversion, where it's more the domestic industry that has got some momentum when the export performance is declining. And then obviously you have energy and transport, which are the two systemic industries where obviously most of these reforms currently are targeted and which are obviously likely to see some improvement because of the focus that is being put on them, and rightly so, because they are the backbone of any economy, so they have to be functional for the rest to function. So in that sense, when these two sectors start showing some momentum, it can then translate into other sectors as well, because there's some of these energy and transport issues that are a limiting factor for the rest of the economy. You know, chemicals can't perform very well if the other manufacturing industries are not performing very well. Metals cannot perform very well if construction and automotive are not performing. So everything is interlinked. I'm not going to talk about the liquidations because we're going to talk about it right afterwards, so I'll just skip this graph. And to finish this presentation, I wanted to focus a bit more on the mining sector because I think it's interesting because it also gives a bit of perspective onto some of the shifts that might happen for the South African economy. In the sense that, as I said, I think that it's important that the policies right now are focused on the domestic drivers. And so in the mining industry, this translate into how do we adapt our mining industry, or how does the mining industry, which is still important, like not necessarily in terms of share in GDP, but it's an important part of the South African economy. It also drives a lot of other industries around it. So for the mining industry, you can clearly see that some mining groups or groups are doing well. So it's chromium, either manganese as well, it's not here, copper that are doing well and even better than what the situation was before the pandemic. And you have some that are continuing to underperform, notably the PGMs, diamonds, gold as well. And so we are already seeing a certain number of companies, big mining majors, asking themselves, maybe we have to reorient our production towards mineral groups that will be in higher demand. So a shift. So that also signals that some of these large industries are also asking themselves the same questions as we are at the macro level, is that how do we adapt, and what exactly do we do to remain profitable in a context where some of our specializations are perhaps not profitable, are not up to date to what the global economy needs. And so then on the industrial side, on the metal sector, obviously I said that the steel market is complicated, and so the ArcelorMittal closures are an example of that, an illustration of that. But like, it's not only in South Africa, they're also closing down plants elsewhere in the world because the steel market is complicated. So then the question becomes, how do we manage to keep a steel industry that is functional in South Africa? Where does our output go? And I think that here again, part of the answer is stimulating more of the domestic industries to have outputs that you don't need to export. And also, well, obviously there's the issue of cheap Chinese steel, but on that front, I mean, I'm not sure that there's much that you can do to compete with China when they have decided that they would export at low prices. So in that sense, I mean, once again, I do think that the external factors are more harder to control, and so focusing perhaps on the domestic drivers would be perhaps the strategic approach that this country needs going forward. Well, at least in what we are seeing in the past months, that's kind of the vibe we get, that yes, we want to put some more focus on South Africa and the South Africans and to improve their lives, and so the economy at the same time. Voilà, that's it for me. Now we'll talk about liquidations with Eric, and thank you for listening to me.